People who have offended in his local manors, over his vast estates, and are going to be brought here to be jailed at the same time.
What was John Ball doing in prison?
Well, John Ball is in prison because he is acting as a radical preacher. And it seems he's been in prison 3 or 4 times, and that he's brought in each time for operating as a preacher without license, and also because the text of his sermons and the text of his teaching is radically undermining of the traditional authority of the church in England.
In what way is he a radical?
He's a radical because he wishes to reform the church from within in terms of its care for the poor and the sick and the distribution of alms. And he's a radical because he wishes to go back fundamentally to the way the church was long ago. He's symptomatic of new attitudes among the clergy.
Was it just John Ball they rescued?
John Ball is just one among many prisoners at that time. We probably ought to give more importance to those other prisoners, people who are local rebels in the Archbishop's courts, but also those who from the 1370s, despite the fact that they could be retained and taken into warfare in northern France, actually refused to do that. And it's quite clear that the area around Maidstone, and indeed Tunbridge, was an area of a hotbed for that kind of those kind of refuseniks, if you like, those kind of people who would not fight. Even as late as May in 1381, militia groups were being raised in Kent, and each of those militia groups had its own leader, and a little band of potential fighters who were being raised to fight against the French and the Castilians. It's immediately a recruiting ground, of course, for the peasant revolt.
12 days in, the peasants' revolt had become a crusade. The rebels were organised. They had a manifesto and were using targeted violence to achieve their aims. After destroying the Archbishop's prison, they headed off for Simon Sudbury's HQ, 30 miles away in Canterbury. He was the chief poll tax enforcer, and the rebels wanted his blood. They marched into Canterbury on the morning of the 10th, joined up with the local people, rooted out and executed all those who were identified as traitors, and then pitched up here at the cathedral. They burst in and completely disrupted High Mass, which would have been deeply offensive in itself, then demanded the removal of Archbishop Sudbury and that John Bull should be put in his place. None of these chairs would have been here. This whole area would have been one vast open space, with the people completely cut off from the priests by that choir screen over there. But the rebels ignored all that. They marched straight in. This whole place, which would have been so quiet normally, would suddenly have been full of angry voices and people demanding that Archbishop Sudbury come in front of them. The whole thing must have seemed like complete anarchy. But of course Sudbury wasn't here. He was far too shrewd a political animal. He was up in London, not in his abbey church. But they'd gone too far to give up now. Instead, they launched a lightning strike on London. What would happen when this tidal wave of angry peasants reached the capital? After only 12 days of the peasants' revolt, a carefully ordered medieval world had been blown apart. Most of southern England was beyond the rule of law. In search of an end to unfair taxes and serfdom, the rebels had broken open jails and invaded the headquarters of the church, Canterbury Cathedral. Then, the chronicles tell us, they embarked on a daring strategy to attack the capital itself. The stories seem scarcely possible, so we're going to put them to the test. After the raid on the cathedral, we're told that the rebels set off en masse for London on the morning of the 11th, and that 60,000 of them turned up at Blackheath on the outskirts of the capital the following evening. But that seems a heck of a long way to go for such a large crowd in such a short time. So Mike and his team are going to put the chronicles to the test and see how easy it would have been to have done that march in, what, 36 hours?
We know they went from Canterbury via Maidstone, because they kicked off a lot of trouble there.
So that means that they were actually going in a bit of a curve?
A little bit of a curve, not straight up the A2. So we're going to follow a similar route, but we are obviously going to have to wiggle a bit because we can't take these main roads with the horses. think at least some of us might get there. We're certainly going to give it a go. Would you like to give it a go with us?
I am probably the world's worst horseman.
But
I'll give it a go.
splendid. I think you ought to wear this.
Will you help me on with it?
I will. We've got a wonderful horse for you called Milano, and she'll make you look good. She's very steady and very good. And you're just going to have to sit there and grit your teeth and put up with the pain.
I'll look cool, you promise me.
Oh, yeah.
This is Milano.
This is Milano.
Hello, mate. Hello. Oh, I haven't done this for a long time. Got my leg up. Oh, can't get it put in. We want to establish if 60,000 peasants really could get to London in a day and a half.
OK, let's go to London.
We're giving ourselves every advantage. Although most of the peasants would have been on foot, we're using the fastest mode of medieval transport. We've got changes of horses lined up and the advantage of 21st century planning and communications. But there are some obstacles the medieval peasants wouldn't have had. What kind of surface do you reckon these roads would have had in the 14th century?
Well, I think once we're out of the precincts, it would have been dirt roads.
Yeah.
Because that's what all the transport was, horse transport, and that is much kinder to horses.
It's not making noise, this, doesn't it?
Well, I think noise stress is going to be one of our most tiring factors.
Yeah.
Hours on end on the road.
One thing's certain, the medieval peasant must have had a hardier bottom than me. After an hour or so, I was starting to suffer, and then disaster struck. Right, this is what happened. We rode along for about an hour, and then I had to stop for a bit because I had to get off and do a bit of filming, and they rode on because they were already late and they needed to catch up time. And by the time I finished filming, we couldn't find them. And so we've been looking for them ever since, and we've lost radio contact and we've lost telephone contact, and I'm stuck here with all the film crew. We've got to be here because we've got to swap over the horses, because nowadays with animal welfare you can't ride the same set of horses for the whole 36 hours. And we've completely lost the rest of the riders. And in a funny sort of way, maybe this is what it would have been like in small communities along the way, not knowing what was going on. So perhaps, inadvertently, we've recaptured the whole spirit of the Peasants' Revolt. On the other hand, maybe we've just fouled up. But this enforced separation gave me the chance to investigate an equally important part of the revolt elsewhere. At school, what you learn about is the peasants marching from Canterbury, but that's not even half the story. North of the Thames, thousands of peasants from hundreds of villages were forming the second arm of a coordinated pincer movement, threatening to crush London. People from all over East Anglia had joined the Essex rebels. Men like John Sumner from Manningtree near Ipswich. We know he owned 400 marks worth of goods. That's over £130,000 today. His neighbour Robert Pierce was also a rich landowner. Both were totally unlike a caricature of a peasant. Pierce and Sumner joined 40 others from their village. The focus of their anger was still the injustice of the poll tax. Along the road, the Manningtree men united with others. Their road to London was marked by a carefully targeted campaign of violence. Their first stop was here, at Coggleshall in Essex, headquarters of the Chief Tax Collector for Essex. This is his house here. They yanked him out of his window, beheaded him in the street and stuck his head on a pole. Then they ransacked the whole house looking for the hated green-sealed poll tax documents, which they destroyed. They might be able to replace the tax collector, but how would they know who to tax? Then the rebels headed 5 miles down the road to the Manor of the Knights Hospitaller at Cressing Temple. This was the order run by the poll tax villain Robert Hales. They were joined there by others from all over the county who'd chosen the manor as a rendezvous point, and in